Hello, and thank you for joining us here today at BPC's J. Ronald Terwilliger Center for Housing Policy. I'm Owen Minot, a senior policy analyst here at BPC. Today, we'll be joined by officials from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to discuss the Housing Choice Voucher Program, the federal government's largest rental assistance program. Through the program, public housing authorities provide vouchers to help low-income households afford housing they find in the private market with the aim of reducing housing instability. However, many landlords, particularly those in low-poverty neighborhoods, decline to participate in the program, citing a variety of challenges and negative experiences. That holds the program back from reaching its full potential in supporting the housing needs of voucher holders. Today, we'll be discussing the key barriers for landlord acceptance of vouchers, as well as strategies that HUD is implementing to encourage greater landlord participation in the voucher program. Just to outline our programming today, first, we'll have a presentation by our guests from HUD, followed by further discussion through a Q&A session. If you're watching live today, please do submit any questions you have at any time, and you can post them in the chat if you're watching on YouTube. And now, let me introduce our guests. We are fortunate to have three esteemed experts from HUD to present their findings on the voucher program, as well as recent agency initiatives to improve the program. Solomon Green is the Principal Assistant Secretary for Policy Development and Research at HUD, and PD&R is the office that conducts, supports, and shares research and program evaluations. Before coming to HUD, Solomon held leadership positions in research institutions, nonprofits, and in local and federal government, including his role as a senior fellow at the Urban Institute. Todd Richardson is the General Deputy Assistant Secretary at PD&R, and Todd is a longtime HUD official leading research and national survey efforts and has developed a number of funding formula allocations for HUD programs. And Nicholas Bilka is the acting director for the Housing Choice Voucher Program, and he has served on multiple teams at HUD and previously worked as a legislative fellow in the Senate. So thank you all for joining us. And with that, I'll kick it over to you for your presentation.
Thank you so much, Owen. I want to start by thanking you, the Bipartisan Policy Center, and the Terwilliger Center for Housing Policy for hosting this forum and this discussion. Today, the nation is facing tremendous housing challenges, including rising housing costs for renters, and too many families being shut out of homeownership and opportunities to build wealth that come with it. Building bipartisan support is so crucial to easing these challenges and making housing markets work for everyone. At HUD, we share the Terwilliger Center's steadfast commitment to ensuring that every American family has a decent, safe, and affordable place to live. And like the Terwilliger Center at HUD, we know that making the commitment a reality will require evidence-based, data-driven, and community-informed solutions, as well as dialogues like the one we're having today. And today's topic, improving and expanding landlord participation in the Housing Choice Voucher Program, is so core to achieving that vision. This topic couldn't be more timely or important. HUD's Housing Choice Voucher is the nation's largest rental assistance program, serving more than 2.2 million households and 5.3 million people every year. And we know that the Housing Choice Voucher Program works. Research shows that Housing Choice Vouchers reduce housing cost burdens, reduce homelessness, can help prevent housing instability, and reduce overcrowding and improve outcomes for families and children. They are also crucial to giving people with low incomes greater choice about where they live. Landlord participation in voucher program is of paramount importance to the success of the program. The Housing Choice Voucher Program depends on landlord participation to make privately owned units available to voucher holders. Therefore, their participation determines the number of available units and where those units are available. But research shows that many landlords choose not to accept housing vouchers, threatening the purpose and objectives of the program. As Todd will show in a minute, we've seen declining utilization rates in the Housing Choice Voucher Program in recent years. And while there are many reasons for this, improving landlord participation in the voucher program would go far in ensuring that every voucher that is issued is used, reduce search times, and improve locational outcomes. Improving landlord participation in the Housing Choice Voucher Program will require a whole of HUD approach, which is why I'm so glad to be joined by Nick Bilka from HUD's Office of Public and Indian Housing, who leads the Housing Choice Voucher Program. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Todd to talk more about the program and share the current state of research and data on landlord participation. After that, Nick will share policy developments, recent program improvements, and ongoing engagement with landlords. We look forward to following the presentations with a lively discussion with you, Owen, and participants joining on the webinar. Thank you.
Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. Before we get started here, I think it is helpful to recall who the voucher program serves. The majority of the 2.35 million households are either elderly or disabled, with the remainder mostly families with minor children. The non-elderly disabled share has been growing as a proportion number of voucher holders, while families with children has been falling. Because the program limits eligibility largely to households with incomes less than 30% of area median income, or the poverty line, the vast majority of tenants are extremely low income. Of those currently assisted, they have been assisted an average of nearly 11 years. Length of stay has been getting longer as we get more elderly and disabled tenants. Length of stay is longer in expensive markets and shorter in more affordable markets. Tenants do pay rent, about $420 per month, which is what they can afford. The average subsidy, including administrative costs, is $948 per month. Before folks are offered a voucher, they tend to be on wait lists for longer than 2 years. We estimate that over 2.5 million households are on HCV wait lists. Roughly 200,000 to 300 vouchers turn over each year and are available to for those households that are on the wait list. A recent study we did shows about 61% of folks issued a voucher off of those wait lists are able to successfully lease, which is down from 69% in 2000. Success rates was 81% in 1993. So we're seeing these falling success rates. Next slide, please. So let's have a little history here. This chart shows the growth of housing assistance over time from 1940 to the present. First, there was public housing. Then in the 1970s, we had project-based Section 8 and tenant-based Section 8, what we now call tenant-based vouchers. Recently, the yellow hair on top of this chart is project-based vouchers. So that's been a new program that's been growing. That said, this chart says two things. Overall, housing assistance has been fixed at roughly 4.6 million households since the mid-1990s. However, tenant-based vouchers are an share of that assistance and represent roughly half of units. This growth in the use of vouchers means we need ever more landlords who are willing to accept the vouchers. Next slide, please. But fewer are doing so. This chart counts landlords using the tax ID numbers that we get in our data as a proxy. You can see that that number has been falling over time, while the number of voucher tenants has been rising. As such, the number of vouchers per landlord, the squiggly line, the smaller line, shows that's been falling much more dramatically. As competition for the lower cost rental units have heated up, we have been losing landlords at more than 5,000 a year for the last decade. There are a lot of landlords in the US. I'm sure that pretty much everyone on this call has been or is a renter, and I bet a large number of folks have been landlords at some point as well. We think about 7% of the roughly 11 million landlords in the US currently lease to a voucher holder. The tricky part is that many of those 11 million landlords rent out just 1 or 2 units. Next slide. Those landlords are important for the HCV program. Now, 66% of landlords in our data show taking just 1 voucher tenant. These one voucher landlords, however, serve just 21% of the voucher holders. Those are mostly in single family housing. But if you take out the folks who only rent to one HCV tenant, the landlord serving the other 80% of the voucher tenants, the average landlord has about 7 voucher tenants, which explains this chart that has the US as well as California and Colorado for comparison as an example. The main source of HCV units are in low-rise apartments, followed by single family. Next slide. A few years ago, we hired the Urban Institute to do a source of income study. This is a paired test. One person with a voucher, one person without a voucher, how do landlords respond? There wasn't really much need for paired testing here because in places without a source of income protection, landlords simply said they don't take vouchers. That's what the left two charts show. The right two charts show places that have some source of income protection and they have a higher rate of landlords accepting vouchers. So if we're going to continue our tenant-based program, then we need to solve for the problem of voucher denial. Landlords not accepting vouchers. In places without source of income protections, it is hard to find a landlord to accept a voucher in the regular rental market unless that landlord is advertising for voucher tenants. Next slide. So what matters to landlords? That means playing to our strength and minimizing our weaknesses. We have some evidence from a 2018 study conducted in Dallas and Cleveland that shows that there are reasons that landlords like the program. They can be a steady source of rent payment. They also can have stable tenants, so they reduce turnover costs. And many landlords like that they're helping folks. But next slide, please. There are weaknesses as well. And how do we address these? Number one in those weaknesses is inspections. The conflicts over inspections is not over what needs to be repaired, but what landlords argue is an inconsistent and capricious process. They can never anticipate what an inspector might find. This leads to costly delays and eventually pushing them out of the program. The conflict here seems to be amplified by the fact that landlords fundamentally believe in the idea of a partnership with the PHA. They have almost fully embraced the idea that they were providing a service by renting to voucher tenants and the implementers of a government program, and therefore expect the PHA to take their side when they have a conflict with a tenant, when there are damages or they think the tenant is causing problems. Landlords take it personally when the PHA seems to prioritize the best interests of the tenant over their own. Now, one big change in the HCV program is the introduction of small area or zip code based fair market rents. So small area FMRs is a way for us to get higher payments to higher cost neighborhoods. We're doing this in a few metro areas right now, and we're doing some research to see how it's going. Next slide, please. Now, the studies I just mentioned, those occurred at a relatively stable time in the rental market in terms of rents and vacancies. Now, in that last slide, interesting enough, just 8% of landlords reported that inadequate rents was a reason not to participate. However, we had a new problem in 2021 that impacted this strength in the program about the stability of rents. It's the amount of rent payment. In 2021, we were seeing that private sector data sources started to show a very fast rise in asking rents. So those private sector sources were right. This chart uses Bureau of Labor Statistics data to show that newly leasing tenants, that top line on this chart, experienced a major spike in rents in 2021. Existing tenants, the line in the middle, also experienced an increase, but not nearly the increase faced by tenants looking for units. Our fair market rents have not been keeping up. Next slide. That is why we made a methodology change in fiscal year 2023 for fair market rents that incorporated rent changes at the local level using private sector data sources. As you can see, this big jump in FMRs reflects the newer higher rents from the prior slide. Next slide, please. I mention this because any change we make to administering the program, we still have to subsidize rents that are close to market. Our Office of Public and Indian Housing has a handy public-facing dashboard that allows us to monitor the vitals of the HCV program. Those vitals took a turn for much worse in 2021, and probably because of that rent spike. This chart shows how HCV leasing, which had been struggling prior to 2021, cratered in 2021. This top chart shows leasing 2016 to 2022. The bottom chart shows households with vouchers looking for units 2016 to 2022. There are lots of folks looking, and leasing was falling in 2021, meaning folks were not finding landlords accepting vouchers. With our aggressive raising of fair market rents in September of 2022, we're starting, I think, to see a turnaround on that. You can see the leasing in November and December of 2022 beginning to turn around, at least to level off. So hopefully a combination of rental markets leveling off since that spike in 2021 and our increase in FMRs will bring us back to pre-2021 leasing. Assuming that is the case, we can turn our attention back to the administrative hurdles of the program that continue to hamper leasing. Next slide, please. So I'm on the research side of the house. So we're doing research studies to test ideas. You do pilots to test changes you might make to a large program. So we have two big demonstrations we're doing right now. One, looking to see if we make a lot of changes and spend a lot of money to help with leasing, does that help with leasing units for that are serving families with children? We're doing another that is looking about giving flexibility to PHAs on how they use their resources to see if that would increase the take-up of the program. So we got those two big demonstrations going on. But that's a setup here for Nick Bilka, who's actually going to talk about what we're doing currently and other proposals we have in the works. So I'll turn it over to Nick. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Todd. As you can see, the voucher program is facing challenges with leasing, and those challenges translate into the lives of our family. These haven't arisen overnight. They're not going to be solved overnight. Over the last 5 years, we started landlord listing sessions around the country. I went to many of them. We used the lesson of those sessions to build resources, implement policy, and continue outreach to keep the conversation with owners going. We're taking an all of the above approach to increase utilization. We give PHAs flexibility to raise rents to meet the market, streamline the inspections process to reduce the time for when the family is approved, finds a unit to when they're approved to when they seek a rent payment. We're giving the PHA ability to use administrative fees for activities like security deposits, utility deposits, landlord incentives, and holding fees. Additionally, we're using PPVs, project-based vouchers, to preserve affordable housing. Taking these steps, we believe we can make the program more user-friendly and provide more opportunities to families. Next slide. One of the things that came out of 2020 and remote work and all that stuff was PHAs. We gave PHAs the ability to use remote inspections to confirm the cure of deficiencies found in inspections. This means that for PHAs that adopt these, there's no longer a need to have an inspector go on site to resolve what can be sometimes minor deficiency, which saves money and time for the PHA and landlord. Through our EHV program, we've leased 50,000 vouchers over a year and a half for homeless and at risk of homeless families. And a big part of the success is PHAs were given service fees to use on things like security deposits, holding fees, application fees, and renter's insurance. Our data shows that this has been heavily used and been part of the success of the program. Next slide. We've taken some recent changes to support HCV utilization. We've used private market data for FMRs, which is important, but we've also allowed PHAs to adopt payment standards to increase above the normal range of payment standards to deal with rent inflation that perhaps they're not seeing in the FMR. We've given new flexibility for the use of admin fees for activities like security deposits and incentive fees and things of that nature. And then we awarded $200 million in new incremental vouchers this year. We gave $750 per voucher to PHAs to use on these activities to increase leasing. Next slide. We've also done a lot of work around HCV outreach and support. We have a lot of resources for PHAs and landlords on our website, including a guidebook for PHAs for best practices in working with landlords. These include the items mentioned on this slide. Through our Office of Field Policy Management, we've held events in every region of the country to encourage HCV landlords to participate in the program. And we're going to continue to have dialogue with groups like BPC on what we can do to improve the program. Next slide. Of course, inspections are a big issue. And as Todd mentioned, consistency. That's the number one issue we heard from landlords, how long it takes to consistency and objectivity of results. Our new inspection process aims to align standards across programs and ensure consistency and accuracy. So if you have two units in the same condition in different jurisdictions, you better be getting the same results, and that's what we're aiming for. Next slide. For 2023, we got a lot of funding to deal with inflation. We got 2.9 billion more in money, and most of that goes to HAP. We got a 10% increase in HAP, which PHAs can only use for rent. And we also got a 15% increase in admin fees. This is to adjust to the inflationary pressures of last year. And we're strongly encouraging PHAs to lease up using this money. Next slide. The main highlights of 23 funding for you all are their new awards for VASH, which is our Veterans Homelessness Program, the Family Unification Program, and another $15 million for general purpose vouchers. Also, we're making great efforts to increase the leasing for some of our special purpose vouchers like Mainstream that go to non-elderly disabled families. And we're giving increased fees for some of those PHAs to take on some of those leasing activities I spoke of before. We have a few proposals in the 24 budget that relate to this. We're going to have a HAP as security deposit demonstration, because as I mentioned, we can only use HAP for rental payments, and that's been interpreted as excluding security deposits. We want to codify the administrative fee flexibilities that we put forth in a notice this year. We only have that through appropriations, so we want to put it in the actual statute. And there's some, also we want to allow the pre-inspection of units, which means if you have a unit but you don't have a family yet, we can have it inspected, and then you can tell the family, they can move in right away. These are some of the things we're trying to do to align our program so that it's more like the private sector. Thanks for having me here today. I want to end on an encouraging note, which Todd also mentioned. We're facing challenges from secular trends and the unique challenges navigating the pandemic, but we're starting to see results. The past 3 months, November, December, January, in VMS, we've seen leasing increase after declining throughout 2021. And other preliminary data indicates this trend has continued through April. So with the help of our partners in PHAs and landlords, we are hoping these trends can continue and accelerate in 2023. Thank you.
Thank you all for that really informative presentation. So I'm glad that you guys mentioned HUD's proposed budget for the next fiscal year. Can you talk a little bit more about the process for developing these budget proposals and why HUD decided to prioritize these voucher measures specifically?
Well, I think in speaking to this, you can see the data that Todd presented, and that pretty much helps to drive us. We've seen the trends, and we've talked to landlords, and we've asked PHAs what's worked in getting landlords to participate in the program. The inspections is always a big issue. And one of the things that was mentioned in the landlord listening sessions was that perhaps having an option for pre-inspection would be good. I know we're currently doing that as part of our MTW landlord incentive study, which Todd can address if he so wishes. In addition, we've seen a lot of success with EHV, with the service fees that have been used for things like security deposits. So we want to replicate that with the general program. We're not going to get the fees that EHV got, because that was from the American Rescue Plan, and it was they were very generous fee structure with that. But at a smaller amount, how can we kind of implement those things? The HAP is security deposit. We want to go small at first so we can see what the effect this has on spending and what the effect it has on utilization and success rates. Right now, we have 120,000 families, 120,000 families on the street looking for housing through the program. And if we can get that success rate from 50 to 70% or 80% or whatever the highest possible threshold we can get, that's tens of thousands of families that'll be housed, and tens of thousands more landlords who are receiving payment and hopefully having a good experience with the program.
And while we work on getting these budget proposals through, we have ongoing research that is looking at the effectiveness of these different tools to improve leasing. So these are sort of controlled experiment studies, so we can actually zero in on which particular interventions get us the biggest bang for the buck in terms of improving leasing.
Great. So as you just mentioned in your presentation, many landlords find the inspection process burdensome and say it disincentivizes them to accept vouchers. But my understanding is inspections are a required part in statute as part of the program. But there are things that HUD and PHAs can do to streamline and improve the process, as you kind of referred to. Are there any other promising changes to the inspection process you have seen piloted, studied, or considered, or any really key ones you just want to reiterate?
I will reiterate again that the MTW landlord incentives cohort is using that pilot to check out how pre-inspections work as a way of incentivizing landlord participation. There's a bill called the Choice and Affordable Housing Act that I know BPC supports that includes a pre-inspection provision as part of that. So that's something we're trying to do there, along with some of the recent legislation we've implemented through HOTMA has some inspection flexibilities in terms of if your property is inspected through another federal program, you can enter the program. You have to do a confirmatory inspection, but the folks can move into the housing. In addition, we've allowed PHAs to do biennial inspections, which takes out, one inspection per year or one inspection every 2 years. So we're hoping that PHAs will take advantage of this because it reduces burden on the landlords, but it also reduces burden on the PHA. And hopefully they can put that kind of funding into things like landlord incentives or providing a higher level of customer service.
As you've mentioned, some of what HUD seems to be trying to do through its pilot and demonstration programs is to evaluate which policies are most effective at increasing landlord participation. Are there any research questions that remain for you and where you would like to see more evidence to evaluate potential strategies?
I'll leave that, Solomon, you want to take a stab at that first?
Yeah, I do think, as you noted, Owen, and as you heard during the presentation, we are testing so much, as much as we can, with what is available to improve the program with the existing flexibilities that you have, that HUD has. So we work within statutory constraints, as we've talked about, and how we can administer the program. And using flexibilities such as those provided to housing authorities through the MTW program, really testing things like stepped and tiered rents and other ways to improve landlord participation. I think there are a lot of research questions that go beyond what HUD can do with our existing flexibilities and the flexibilities we can provide PHAs that could inform what the future of the voucher program could look like. So one way to think about what we're studying is really with the tools we have, how much can we push, how far can we push, and what is that going to give us in terms of improving success rates, improving the impact of vouchers. I think there are a whole set of questions for the broader research community and that HUD could explore about how we might do things differently and what some of those needed and evidence-based statutory changes might look like. And Todd, do you want to say more about, we covered a lot that's in our current research agenda, but what is it that we wish we could study, but isn't currently underway from your perspective?
Well, Solomon, I hate to interrupt, but I think one thing we'd like to study is HAP as a security deposit. Since that's in our 2024 proposal, I just want to keep on message and keep mentioning how much we want to study that, because PHAs that are struggling to lease up families, they also tend to accumulate reserves. So it's not the most efficient use of resources if we can use some of those reserves to help lease family and house the tight housing markets. And sorry, go ahead, Todd.
Yeah, obviously that's a really important thing for us to be looking at. I think another area where we want to look is how we're serving non-elderly disabled and helping leasing for non-elderly disabled. That is our fastest growing population in the voucher program, and it is a unique population in terms of it has special needs. So I think better understanding how these different interventions affect that particular group will be of value for continuing research. And that's just sort of like, as we look at all of these programs, we need to be looking at the different subgroups of households we serve and making sure that these different interventions are matching up well to those different groups.
Great. So we had a panel related to this topic with a couple of public housing authority leaders. And one of them told us that the best thing you can do to encourage landlords to participate in the program is to make the price right, meaning setting fair market rents at a competitive level to attract landlords. And as you mentioned, HUD made quite a few changes in the 2023 fair market rent calculation. Can you just talk a little bit more about, why you see that as important and what impact you might be hoping to see with that change?
Yeah, absolutely. And Todd previewed what the change was, but in case you missed it, we did make some changes to the data that we used to calculate fair market rents in the current year, fiscal year 23. These were actually really driven by two things that happened during the pandemic. One is, as Todd also showed, we saw a significant spike in rents in recent years. And the second, which I don't think Todd mentioned, was that some of the data collected through the Census Department it was interrupted by the pandemic, the data collection efforts, particularly around the 2020 ACS, or American Community Survey, which was one of the key data sources that we had traditionally relied on in calculating FMRs. And in the theme of a crisis is a terrible thing to waste, and being as nimble as and responsive as we possibly could, we ended up supplementing the traditional data sources that we rely on to calculate FMRs with private sector data, drawing from several companies that collect nearly real-time data on rents in the private market. And we did this in two steps in our fair market rent calculations. And the result was that FMRs, fair market rents, did increase significantly in 2023. On average, it's a 10.4% increase over fiscal year 2022 across the nation. And the impact this had on people and communities is it meant that hopefully our vouchers went farther. They reached more households, or I should say households were more successful in placing those vouchers, using those vouchers, because the rent standards and the payment standards were able to keep up with inflation and with a very volatile housing market. So I don't, Todd or Nick, I don't think we have quantitative evidence, or we do have a glimpse of the success of that change in some of the data, and I'll let Nick or Todd talk about that.
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead,
So
Nick.
we have seen some evidence of that. The number of units leased has gone up. In addition, we can look at, and that's through our VMS system, which lags by a couple of months. But if you look at the real-time data in our granular public housing information system, you can see that trend continued through April. And you also see that the per unit costs are rising in the program. And that's a result of PHAs adjusting their rents. Because really, one of the things that has kept pucks from exploding in the program is tenant income has actually gone up over the last year as people have benefited from what is a tight labor market.
Yeah, and actually, when Nick and I were actually at a conference this week with a bunch of public housing authorities, and I talked about the raising of the fair market rents, and it's the first time I've ever had everyone enthusiastic among PHAs. So maybe we got it close to correct.
And as you mentioned, though most PHAs use fair market rents, HUD also sets those zip code level small area fair market rents in a 24 metro areas are required to use those, as I understand. Can you speak any more to what the impact of these small area rents are on landlord participation, as well as, you know, helping voucher holders move to some of those more well-resourced neighborhoods?
Well, I'll start here. A few years ago, we did a study on smaller FMRs that showed that by shifting to that, we would have more leasing in higher cost areas. So that would allow folks to have more opportunity for units, open up some markets. And so that's why we shifted to this program. So we're just looking at the data now with those 24 PHAs. Early evidence seems to support what we found in the research we had done a few years ago, that we are seeing more leasing in the higher cost neighborhoods, and that is opening up some. So what that means is more landlords, right? New landlords we haven't used, that have not participated before, and that does seem to be helping some. And one of the things we were worried about was whether or not that would cause leasing, success rates to go down, or to lease or utilization to fall. And we haven't actually seen that for those agencies and compared to other agencies. So I think cautiously, so far so good on the smaller FMRs.
And following up on that, have any public housing authorities shown interest in voluntarily adopting small area rents in your experience?
What data we have shows that we haven't had a huge uptake of that. We have had a decent uptake of exception payment standards, which are to allow that kind of thing in particular neighborhoods. But we also found from the doing listening sessions with those PHAs that implemented smaller FMRs that it wasn't as administratively burdensome as they might have considered it being. And one of the things we did in this year's implementation notice for HCV funding is that we had an eligibility for the costs of adopting smaller FMRs, because changing their technology to have, instead of having one uniform payment standard, perhaps having 50 across different neighborhoods and zip codes is a challenge from an administrative perspective, and it does have some costs associated with it.
Great. And I just want to remind anyone watching on YouTube to feel free to ask any questions in the comment section. So as you guys kind of referenced, some PHAs have made efforts to leverage technology, and I've read of even artificial intelligence to enhance their voucher programs. Do any promising examples come to mind for you to share, or are there existing authorities that allow HUD and PHAs to fully test and support these types of technological solutions?
Well, I will say, I think there are PHAs that are implementing this, and I've seen demonstrations. I'll shout out the Dallas Housing Authority. They gave me a demonstration of what they call their Bob AI technology. And of course, we don't endorse any particular company or product, but it was pretty neat in terms of we often, and I think this has changed from the pandemic, but both HUD and PHAs have tried to operate what is a 21st century program, often using technology that's a little before that. So they have the ability. You don't have to fill out any forms. It's all electronic. That's basically how you do. I bought a house during the pandemic. A lot of that was done virtually, the signing of documents, as much as we can emulate the private sector in that regard and have it user friendly. That's helpful. And another thing I think in terms of the inspection process is it, having the right technological solution can really help with scheduling. What we want is the program in terms of scheduling inspections, especially in a large metro area where they'll have lots of inspections. Our model we don't want our model to be the cable company. We'll be here between 12 and 5 and 6 o'clock. And that's not the model we want to go on. We want to go on the like Uber Lyft model, something where you get more real-time data on when the inspector is going to come, because a lot of our landlords, this isn't their full-time job. As Todd alluded to, if you have 1 or 2 units, you're probably working a full-time job in addition to trying to do this work, and you may not have employees or anything like that. I think one of the upsides and downsides of the program are, conversely, we have 2,100 some different PHAs, and they have the ability to run their programs within regulation and statute. in ways that they deem the most efficient. And sometimes that can be really useful because, as Todd has alluded to with some of the MTW studies we do, we're able to sort of be a lab to see what policies work across different PHAs. And then some PHAs adopt their own innovative strategies without any prompting from HUD. But not every PHA, because some are small, are going to be able to adopt those technological solutions easily. So we have to figure out how we can help with that. And whether it's technical assistance or just bringing people together to share information.
I would just add, Nick talked about some of the ways PHAs are leveraging technology to improve their own management of the voucher program, as well as expand landlord participation. I think there's also a lot of innovation happening from the voucher holder the side to make it easier, leveraging technology to find available units. Report discrimination if voucher holders are discriminated against. And so I think that there's opportunities for technology for all the stakeholders and necessary partners, the PHAs administering programs, for landlords and for tenants. And I think there's a lot of promise on the tenant side as well to make it easier to find those landlords. Expand their search outside of usual neighborhoods to find housing that best suits their and their families' needs.
Great. So we've talked about the inspection process. We've talked about fair market rents, but there are also monetary and other incentives for landlords, liaisons to PHAs. You mentioned engagement strategies. So with all these kind of potential solutions, do you think that it's necessary to, for PHAs to try and use an all hands on deck, all of the above approach? Or do you think could be more about finding one or two more targeted policies that a PHA can find that work for them?
So I would say that in the demonstration research that we're doing, the two big studies that we have going on right now, we're trying to answer those very questions, which are, we have, for example, in our community choice demonstration, where we're trying to help families with children lease in lower poverty neighborhoods, we have two approaches we're using. One that is which is a all of those things approach, right? It's got the landlord liaisons, it's got there's folks counseling the tenants. It has sort of various things to help people with down payment assistance. Security deposit. So it has all that going on. And then we have a smaller one that just tests a few of those ideas to see how that, and it's random assignment sort of study, so we can actually see what the effects are there. So we're trying to get at that answer. It's about which ones of these different interventions are most effective.
Yeah, and I'll jump in. It's easy to say, and I'd like to be able to, the intuitive response would be the kitchen sink, right? Try everything. This is such an important issue and a priority for PHAs, a priority for HUD to expand landlord participation, increase the options for voucher holders. But we also grapple with the reality that PHAs have limited resources and competing demands. And so I do believe, going back to what Todd suggested, doing research here to find out where you get the biggest bang for your buck for your effort is so key. I think the other piece of this, going to what Nick mentioned earlier, is listening to landlords themselves through landlord engagement to be able to prioritize, because it would be nice to say, fire on all pistons, but in the end, there are tough decisions with limited resources that PHAs have to make. How HUD can help is through that research to identify what are some of the most effective strategies, and to be able to support that engagement with landlords to understand what their perspective is about what's working. I'll also say that one of the successful strategies we've seen locally is landlord to landlord engagement. Some of the best champions for the voucher program are landlords who participate in it and see the value in terms of a steady rental income, and the quality of the tenants that participate, the families that participate in the voucher program. They're good tenants. And so some of the best champions for the voucher program are landlords who participate in vouchers themselves. And I'm encouraged to see many states and localities having peer-to-peer exchanges and learning sessions led by landlords who participate in the program.
Yeah, I would just add, like Solomon said, intuitively, it sounds like we should say all of the above, but the reality is, we have 2,100 PHAs, and I think the majority of them, I wish I had the numbers on me right now, have less than 550 units. So you're not talking about organizations with large staffs, and some of the smaller ones, it might just be one person working part-time. So they have to consider what the best strategy is for their local community and housing market. And one of the big things that can make a difference is just improving customer service. Because one of the things we heard from some areas was that places that were more successful in working with landlords tended to have more staff devoted to customer service to that, and were more responsive. And that's so important, as well as some of the larger PHAs are able to get housing navigators to help families, navigate the lease process from finding a unit to signing the lease and all that kind of stuff. So it just really depends on your local market and the resources available to you.
So we do have some audience questions I want to take a chance to get to. One audience member asks, are there any strategies specifically to attract or partner with larger institutional housing providers that you've seen that have promise?
Well, I know I've spoken to a number of different outside groups over the course of the last year, and I know Fannie Mae was running a demonstration, and I'm probably not going to get all the details right, but essentially they're offering a more favorable mortgage product to multifamily housing owners that agree to participate in the program, and they're also conducting a study along with that. So I think that's interesting, and I know they're talking about refining or potentially doing a different pilot this year. So I think partnering with an agency like that's, I guess government sponsored entity that has a big role in the housing market, I think those kind of things can be promising. We also continue to have conversations with groups like the National Apartment Association and National Multifamily Housing Council to just see where we can partner and how we can be in a more effective program.
Some folks have proposed providing direct payments to tenants instead of having PHAs remit payments to landlords on their behalf. In your view, can you speak about what the potential trade-offs inherent in moving to a more direct-to-tenant delivery system might be, particularly as it relates to landlord participation?
Well, I can reach back into the far past. In the 1970s, we ran a large national experiment to actually test that question about cash assistance for rent. There's a program called the Experimental Housing Allowance Program. I think what we found there was that program was good for tenants like that, but it was harder for landlords. Weren't as enthusiastic about it. So when we're talking about landlord participation here, I think it's an open question about whether or not cash assistance would be something landlords like or don't like. One of the nice things about the voucher program is that the PHA is paying the landlord directly for the subsidy portion. If we provided cash to tenants, then the tenant would be paying 100%. On the positive side for landlords, if we did cash to the tenant, then they would not have to have a sort of like interaction with this bureaucratic body. They would need to be working just with their tenant. So that might be more like the private sector and how people rent units. So I think it's an open question about whether or not this would increase landlord participation or not. it would certainly give more control to the tenants.
Yeah, I think Todd did a great job summarizing the open questions, and open questions to me as a researcher always suggest a great need to actually test those questions and figure out what the answers are. I think that the answer on the direct rental assistance idea would be that it really depends on how you design the program. How does it interact with requirements such as inspection? And how does it interact with the more traditional, the current housing choice voucher program? So I think it's a really intriguing idea. I know that it's one many researchers have proposed or looked at. It's also worth mentioning that there are also more small state and local voucher programs that are administered and funded through state and local funds. And going back to some of what are your open research questions, they tend to play a different role than the housing choice voucher, either being more shallow or short term, and taking a look at what we can learn from some of those state and local efforts, and if there are any lessons for us in the direct rental assistance question as well.
I noticed, Todd, I think this was in your portion of the presentation, that you kind of showed where there are sources of income protections. And even in those cities, there was a level of denial of voucher holders. And so I wondered if you could speak a little to, some of the challenges with enforcing those sorts of income protection measures, and whether you think that that kind of, indicates that there's a need for attracting landlords, even in those places where, they do have those protections.
I can actually speak a bit to that. I've done in past roles a bit of research on state and local source of income protections, and help develop a database of where those protections exist that researchers could use and are currently using to examine the effects of source of income protections on things like success rates and locational outcomes. And what I can say is exactly what you mentioned, Owen, which is the law in the books isn't enough. To have an anti-discrimination source of income protection doesn't necessarily result in better outcomes for voucher holders if it's not also accompanied by other things, such as program improvements. One of the most innovative things I've seen done, not the only, but one of the most innovative, was in the state of Oregon. They also, when they passed their source of income protection law, they also created a landlord mitigation fund that would repay landlords for any lost security deposits when a voucher holder left a unit. And what was incredible about that fund was it was so rarely tapped because, in fact, voucher holders are good tenants. And it addressed a concern that landlords had, and one might say a myth about voucher holders. It created a comfort level, and it was a good statewide investment because that pool, was so rarely used, but it actually made a big difference in addressing one of the concerns that landlords had when they were negotiating whether or not to support a statewide source of income protection law. So I think enforcement is important. PHAs have to be involved, local housing authorities have to be involved in listening to landlords and figuring out what is it going to take to make these protections actually work, make the program easier to access, and enforcement. So there's, the devil is always in the details, and there are over 100 state and local source of income discrimination laws on the books right now. One of the other things we looked at is there's wide variety in how those laws are designed, who can use them, what a complaint looks like. So going back to areas for more research, I think really understanding how those laws work, what are the key features of laws that make them work, and what else besides the law is necessary to really increase landlord participation in the program.
Yeah, and I would just say whether we can't really, at least from our perspective, control whether a local jurisdiction or state adopts those kind of policies. But what we can do is try to make our program more efficient and work better for everyone who's involved with it, whether they be tenant or landlords.
Great. And so we are, coming up on our last couple of minutes of this webinar. So I just wanted to ask whether you all had any closing thoughts you wanted to share that we didn't have a chance to touch on, or anything particularly important that you want to reiterate as a key takeaway for our audience.
Well, if you are a landlord or you become a landlord, because many people surprisingly become landlords, weren't expecting it, take a look at the voucher program. Hopefully you'll accept, you'll consider it.
Yeah, I would echo what Todd said, and I would encourage you to just go to your Google if you're curious for more information on the program. Type in HCV landlord. I believe that'll take you to our landlord resources page. If you're someone working in a local community or with a local government, we also have a landlord symposium toolkit. You don't have to be a PHA to try to put something like this together, or although it's certainly helpful to collaborate with your PHA on that. And just and it just provides the basic materials to have an event that focuses on starting a dialogue between landlords and the PHA.
Yeah, I would echo all of those closing remarks. And I would add something, we haven't talked about, but the big issue the larger issue limiting use of the voucher program is there simply aren't enough units to go around. That is the biggest challenge we are facing. And so the fewer landlords that participate in the program, the harder it is, obviously, because you're shrinking the supply of available units. The harder it is to place those vouchers. But I would also just add that we have a larger housing supply and affordable housing supply challenge in this country. And so solutions to how to make the voucher program work need to be tied to how do we also expand the stock of housing that's affordable, low and moderate income families generally. So voucher holders aren't in such fierce and stiff competition with low-income families that don't have vouchers. So just wanted to mention that as well. We need to increase the supply in every way we can. I think landlords are invaluable partners in doing that by learning more about the voucher program, participating more in the voucher program, but our housing providers are people, the stakeholders who fund housing, local governments that can control land use and zoning regulations, make it easier to build housing. And we need a comprehensive approach to address these challenges.
I definitely agree. Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have. Thank you, Solomon, Todd, and Nicholas, for taking the time out of your busy schedules to talk with us about this really important topic. The voucher program is such a critical resource for households with the greatest need, and we really appreciate your hard work to maximize the impact of the program. And thanks also to everyone in the audience for joining us today. And I hope you all have a great weekend.
Thank you, Owen.
Thank you, Owen.